There comes a time in every Magic the Gathering player's life where you have to determine what is your favorite set. A couple of credentials come to mind. Personally, I'm very fond of the sets that were in Standard when I got into Magic. So Ravnica, Theros, Tarkir all come to mind. You might also be pulled to a set that means something special to you thematically. Personally, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, it might be recency bias, but I love it so far. Somewhat in part to the fact that I made a video years ago pleading to WotC to make a cowboy set. Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's something unique that's meaningful to you, maybe it's just Maybelline. Hi, I'm Harrison, I run these here parts. I want to talk to you about Future Sight. I think Future Sight is the most creative set Magic the Gathering has ever made and will ever make. In May of 2007, the 180 card set was released. It was the third and final set in the block of Time Spiral. Back in the day, we wouldn't jump around between worlds every single set. Instead, you'd get a core set in the summer, and then each year you'd get 3 sets throughout that were part of a bigger story. And then these 3 sets together were called a block. This block in particular did something neat in each set. The first set was Time Spiral. It came out in the fall of 2006. In every pack, you get a time-shifted card. It has its own rarity, perhaps you've even seen one in the wild. Instead of black, silver, or gold, it'd actually be purple. And this actually predates Mythic Rare. It was essentially a reprint, but it had its own special slot. Magic still does this from time to time nowadays. Like the most recent set, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, has the big score sheet, meaning that when they were printing the set, one of the sheets that they'd be printing is the big score, and then that means that at the back of your pack you could get a card that is from the big score. So Time Spiral's take on this was reprints. After Time Spiral, there was Planar Chaos. It followed the same guidelines as the Time Spiral sheet, but instead of time, it was color shifted. They were essentially reprints of older cards, except made new again because their colors were changed. And you could tell something was up because they'd have a different frame. Thematically, this was to show that the current reality that we're living in is different than the one that we're actually used to. The new cards still had to function under the color identity of the new colors. Like, you couldn't have a mono red card that gains life now. Magic has rules that each color has to follow. This way, green is the same, or at the very least very similar between every set. We're not used to our normal green one set, and the next set we're getting mono green tappers and flyers. So each of these 45 new cards had to respect their rules. Some of these color swaps just made sense, but we haven't seen much since then, so that's why they're still so powerful and expensive today. This is where we get cards like Damnation. It's a mono black Wrath of God. It's cool that thematically it's still a god being angry, but it's just like a perspective swap. Pyrohemia is the red version of Pestilence. Pyrohemia isn't actually a word, but it uses the prefix pyro, meaning fire, and hemia, which is a suffix, which means relating to blood. So instead of having the disease that's in Pestilence, your blood's just getting set on fire. I don't know which is worse. Keen Sense is just a color-shifted curiosity. And actually, if you look at the 2 cards, they both have to do with Krovax and Miri, which I think is kind of neat. A very popular one, White got Mana Tithe, which is actually just a white version of Force Spike, in a set where they're explicitly going out of their way to do weird things that a color can do, but it just doesn't do often. A white counterspell is perfect. And this card still shows up today. Like, Mana Tithe is one of the 3 cards from this whole color swap phase that actually is on Magic Arena. Sure, playing around with colors would be really fun. You can generate something new and exciting. But what about playing around with time? Sure, they already played around time a little bit with Time Spiral. We went back, we got some reprints. We got an above average number of reprints. But what about preprints? In Future Sight, there were 180 cards, 81 of which are these preprints. Reprints are cards from older Magic sets. Preprints are cards from sets that are in the future, don't exist yet. It's from Magic's future that we will eventually see. This is a really cool way to highlight new planes, new keywords, new mechanics, new themes. Anything new and fresh in Magic could make its way here. Sometimes the designers knew or had a general idea of when these cards would be printed, and sometimes these were just massively called shots. Part of this set being so wild is that when we get a new set, they like to be very narrow with developing it. They want to focus in on what the keywords and mechanics are they're working with. So if we want to use Outlaws of Thunder Junction as a background comparison here, Outlaws had the plot mechanic, committing crime mechanic, the saddle and mount mechanic, the new keyword which was spree, And then we had like the Deserts Matter theme there. Future Sight, on the other hand, had 48 new keywords. 48. If you don't get how crazy this is, before this set was released, Magic the Gathering had only 56 keywords. Part of this set's chaos and freshness actually comes from the design team. Who the design team even was. Mark Rosewater, the head designer for Magic the Gathering, and specifically the lead designer for this set, has a podcast. He has over 1,000 episodes, and each episode is at least 30 minutes where he talks long-windedly about a certain Magic topic. It's a great place to find a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. In this podcast, he straight up says that he picked people to be on his design team for this set who have never designed Magic cards before, or at least have very limited experience with it. He really wanted this set to feel like nothing Magic has ever felt like before, and the best way to feel like Magic has never felt before, get people who've never designed Magic before. Now I can ramble on about the workings of this set all day, but let's talk about the actual cards. I only really want to talk about future shifted cards. There are 100 other cards in this set, and they're cool and all, but I think the future shifted ones are just a lot cooler. Let's start with Tarmogoyf. The first thing you'll notice about this card is the weird border. This was a functional way to differentiate these cards from the rest, but also to show, oh, this is what Magic could look like in the future. Although this border has never really been utilized, we can still see some aspects of it today. For one, in the top left corner, you can see those 3 scratch marks there. Each card typing got its own symbol. And while those aren't used on cards today, they actually are used on Magic Arena and Magic Online to signify the different card types. Beyond the card border and all that fun stuff, let's talk about the actual card of Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf is a very fun example of playing with the future. This card wasn't an immediate hit, but it eventually got really expensive. If you want a cheap copy of Tarmogoyf now, it'll run you about $10, which might seem like a lot for a piece of cardboard if you're newer to the game of Magic, but Tarmogoyf peaked out north of $200. When it came to playing with the future in this set, there was a time there that this card seemed way too powerful to ever show up in Standard, which then makes it kind of funny because Future Sight cards are supposed to be from other worlds in Magic's future. So where is Tarmogoyf's homeworld? Well, what was the next set Tarmogoyf was reprinted into? Modern Masters, and then Modern Masters 2, and Modern Masters 3, and then Ultimate Masters. Even after the hype around this card has died off significantly, it still hasn't been reprinted in a regular set. The closest we got was Fallout giving it the Godzilla treatment with a Deathclaw. It's as if it became a paradox of itself. This joke doesn't land as well now, but it played around in the future with the reminder text it had. Goyf gets bigger for the more card types. So in its reminder text, it lists out some card types. That includes Tribal, which is now Kindred, and Planeswalker. Both of these card types were non-existent at the time, but they actually knew that these were coming out within a year after this set, so they included them here. This isn't the only time they've done this. Actually, the newest Atraxa mentions Battles by name, but Battles didn't come out into the immediate set after. Because they're working so far in advance, they can do these funny little called shots. And the block that came out after Time Spiral was Lorwyn, which introduced Planeswalkers and Tribal. And because they're working so far in advance, they can vaguely plan out some stuff in advance as well. That's how we got Dryad Arbor, which for how simple it really is a mechanical headache. They made Dryad Arbor because they knew they were eventually going to get to a Lands Matter set eventually, sometime soon. And that world actually ended up being Zendikar. They knew it was going to be Lands Matter, so they wanted to throw some fun Lands Matter stuff into play. And I thought a creature land could be really fun here. Which, for the rules headache portion, it is both a land and a creature, so it has to play by the rules of both. It's a land, so it gets to enter the battlefield without being cast, so even though it's a creature, you can't counter it. But it's also a creature, which means it has summoning sickness, so if you play this turn 1, you can't tap it. It has summoning sickness. And while we never saw Dryad Arbor directly on Zendikar, we got token versions that functioned very similarly on Brothers War, which was a set that was a time travel story, so it actually takes place before Dryad Arbor would even exist, so it's our future but their past. Maybe this whole paradox is why it's only a token. Mark Rosewater also stated in his podcast that a lot of the cards that were made for this set, for the future shifted cards, were intended to eventually show up. Like if they were making a brand new set, they would take a look back and see if anything fit. If there happened to be a creature that thematically could fit into a cowboy setting, while also mechanically having some overlap with Outlaws of Thunder Junction, or at the very least not clashing with Thunder Junction, then we very easily could have seen a Future Sight card in this set. This is where we get reprints like Aven Mind Sensor. Eventually, it got printed on a set that's heavily themed around ancient Egypt, and while it isn't directly connected, it still doesn't work against it. Where I also stated there's a bunch of cards that just don't work anymore. The window that they would have been usable is closed. We're past that point now. For example, the cycle of full art creatures. Each of these creatures is what is considered vanilla. It is just a creature. On its own, all it can do is attack and block. That's it. Nothing extra. When you look at most vanilla creatures, the text box is just flavor text. But if you're going to commission some of the best artists in the world to make art for your game, why not show off that art? So that's where we got that cycle of 5 full art creatures. But now Magic's in a spot where we don't really get vanilla creatures. Currently in Standard, there are 6 creatures that are legal that are vanilla, and 5 of those have adventures stapled to the side of them. I wouldn't really call that vanilla. It's more like French vanilla. And the 6th one is Yargle and Maltani, which it's almost a joke of it being vanilla and just happening to be really big. Magic has moved to a point where these 5 creatures likely will never be reprinted again, except for the 2 that actually got lucky and got in before the power creep. The black one was reprinted in 10th edition, and the green one was reprinted in original Theros. But as for the red, white, and blue ones, I don't see them getting printed again. Speaking of cycles, as all sets work, we have a cycle of lands in this set. And I think what they did here was ingenious. Most sets, when they have the lands, they're all part of a bigger cycle. Each one taps for 2 colors, and they can fetch, they can shock, they might ding you for a life, they might gain you a life, something around the sphere. They're all the same, they're just color swapped. Instead of that, each of these lands are part of their own cycle, meaning that they're all glimpses of future land cycles. So starting off, Horizon Canopy you might actually recognize because it's been reprinted so often. And despite being the most expensive card in this set, if you really wanted to pick one up, you could get it for like a toonie. Since then, they've worked with this and expanded upon this. So we haven't seen the actual original cycle that includes Horizon Canopy, but we do have a complete cycle of the enemy colors in Modern Horizons 1. This cycle, non-cycle, really shows the creative efforts that were at play here. After Horizon Canopy, we have Growth of the Burnwillows. It's a land that can tap for a colorless, or if you wanted to, you could tap for a red or a green, and if you do that, it gives your opponent a life. The black-red one was actually printed immediately after in the next block. Again, it's one of these short-sighted called shots that they could do. The blue-white one, Nimbus Maze, made fixing really easy, because if you had all plains out, it taps for blue. Had all islands out, it could tap for white. And if you have one of each, it can tap for either. But probably actually my favorite design from this is River of Tears. It's the black-blue one. It taps for one color, but if you've played a land, it taps for the other. It really feels like they were firing on all cylinders with this cycle. So now I've jumped around. Before I finish off, I want to talk about some of the key parts of this set that I haven't got a chance to discuss yet. Of the 81 future shifted cards that exist, only 28 haven't been reprinted, which is an insane hit rate. It's frankly impressive, but not all of them are organically from their original home that have been future sighted. Like Imperial Masks. Imperial Masks hasn't been reprinted at all. I really want this card to be reprinted, and this card might be really dirt cheap right now, but I really like the implication of it getting reprinted.
Because of the implication.
This was actually the first black border card to refer to teammates, but now we have cards from Battle Bond that actually refer to members of your team. So I'd have to imagine if they were actually ever going to reprint this card, it'd have to be in Battle Bond 2, which the sooner we get Battle Bond 2, the better. Also, while researching this video, I happened to stumble upon the rules notes behind this card from 2007. This card creates tokens that enter the battlefield as enchantments, not creatures. I thought this was such a weird note to look at until I realized this is the first card that makes non-creature tokens. Think of how many non-creature tokens exist today. Think of how many artifact tokens exist today. Treasure, blood, food, None of these exist if it isn't for this card. And I think it's time for WotC to put some respect on it and bring it back to its home world. I don't have it written down in my notes, but I think it'd be a major miss if I didn't talk about Steam Flogger Boss in this set. So Steam Flogger Boss is a rigger and it assembles contraptions, which is all fine and dandy. We all know what that does nowadays, but at the time, Steam Flogger Boss was the only rigger. Eventually there would be another rigger that got errated into being a rigger, but it was the only rigger and contraptions were non-existent. This was a joke card that was put in as kind of just like something goofy to throw in there. I kind of like looking at it in the sense that this is what it feels like to read non-Magic the Gathering trading card games if you don't know what's going on. It's like if I look at Lorcana right now and it's like, oh, insert the Flim Flom and the Bango Bomb, and it's like, okay, I guess, like, sure. So this was done as a joke. What does it even mean to assemble a contraction? We didn't know. Almost a decade later, they actually came out with a silver bordered set, and they actually expanded on it, worked on it, made it work, and this was the only black bordered card in this set. So Steam Flogger Boss was actually a future sight of an unstable set. I feel weird talking on camera without having my notes, so I'm gonna go back to reading my notes now. The next one I really liked was Wet Wheel, and actually Wet Wheel is part of a vertical cycle with Lumerthread Field and Zoetic Cave, and my appreciation for them relates just as much to them as it does to Wet Wheel. They probably wouldn't reprint this today just because Morph has been power crept out of the game, but I really like Morph on non-creatures. We did get Gift of Doom in Commander in 2019, and then we got Disguised on a couple of non-creature cards in Murders at Karlov Manor too. I just think there's no better way of like hiding what you're trying to do than by making a creature out of a non-creature. Like, that's just so funny to me. It's goofy, and goofy is how I like my Magic the Gathering. My fourth and final part I want to talk about here is a series of enchantments from this set. Second Wind, Flowstone Embrace, and Witch's Mist. These are all cards that Mark Rosewater himself said would not work in Magic the Gathering today. He would never let it get through there. The thing that's keeping him from allowing this to be put into Magic the Gathering nowadays is that there are enchantments that tap. For the auras specifically, it might seem a little weird that you have an aura that can tap or untap, and I could see a new player getting into the game, enchanting a creature with this, saying, oh, I tap the creature to untap the creature, then I just tap it again, and it just taps and untaps itself? What's going on? This is just incorrect. This isn't how the card works. You're not tapping the creature, you're tapping the enchantment. It isn't giving the ability to the creature it's enchanting, it just has the ability. And Mark Rosewater, alongside current design in Magic the Gathering, doesn't like this whole tapping enchantments thing. And although I think it's really neat, I appreciate that Mark Rosewater and the design team has some integrity when it comes to making cards like this. They have integrity when it comes to their design philosophy. I think a game like Magic the Gathering works best when you have some of the greatest creative geniuses let loose on a project that is both difficult and engaging to them. You can tell the designers were having fun when making this set, and 17 years later, I don't know if you could tell that anymore. We're in a time of WotC seemingly packaging random intellectual properties as different universes beyond, and I'm sure I don't need to be the only one to tell you. I'm sure you've thought of this. I know every other content creator that doesn't work directly with Magic the Gathering has mentioned this at some point on their channel. And even beyond the content creator community, read the comments. People are tired of it. People are always voicing their concerns. But even like a step beyond this, we are not only in an era of a Hatsune Miku secret lair, which, side note, when this got announced, I first saw people talking about it on TikTok, and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a tired bit. People are making this joke forever now, where it's like, oh, secret lair The Office, secret lair this, secret lair that. It's a tired bit where people just throw in a random IP and say, hey, it's a secret lair. But no. The Hatsune Miku secret lair is real. And not only are these universes beyond products just like too real, but it feels like Magic's core product has also weakened because of this. A series of gimmicky sets have been released that have equated to not much more than, what if your favorite character was wearing a funny hat? And it's made Magic the Gathering feel like it's went from this inspired trading card game with a deep fantasy world behind it to a lazy trading card game with just about whatever behind it. In a time where it feels like creativity is at an all-time standstill, it'd be nice to see a set like Future Sight again. It honestly felt like a group of very creative people got a green light to come up with something that they really wanted to do, and they were able to make their imaginations run wild. It's definitely feeling like Magic the business versus Magic the art form. And at the end of the day, the all-powerful dollar doesn't lose. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to blow your birds.